5 siblings walked into an abandoned farmhouse one summer afternoon. None of them ever walked out. This is the story that haunted Kentucky for decades, and what happened that day still has no answer. It was the summer of 1986 in Kentucky, the kind of summer people remember forever. Heat waves made the roads look like water. The air was so still you could hear insects from half a mile away. Kids spent entire days in the hills with fishing rods and never worried about time. But for the Larkin family, July 1986 became the summer that took 5 of their children and never gave them back. The Larkin siblings were Rachel, 19, David, 17, twins Emma and Eli, 14, and little Matthew, just 9 years old. They lived on a farm about 7 miles outside Manchester in Clay County. These kids were close. The kind of siblings who still hung out on weekends even when the older ones started talking about college and future jobs. On July 12th, they borrowed their father's old blue Chevy pickup. They wanted to explore a place they'd been hearing about all summer. The Merritt Farmhouse sat abandoned for decades. It was half collapsed at the end of a forgotten dirt road. Locals said the family who lived there, the Merritts, vanished back in the 1950s without any explanation. Teenagers spread stories about lights in the windows and screams coming from the fields. To the Larkin kids, it sounded like the perfect Saturday adventure. Around noon, a neighbor named Alma Greer saw the pickup drive past her front porch. Dust kicked up behind it in a thick cloud. She waved at them, and David leaned out the driver's window to wave back. They were all laughing with the windows down and the radio playing something from WKCT. It was just a normal moment, but that normal moment would replay in Alma's mind forever. By evening, when the sun dropped low behind the ridge, their parents noticed something was wrong. The house was too quiet. No TV noise, no dishes clattering, no sound of the truck coming back down the driveway. When night fell, their mother Darlene started calling neighbors. She asked if anyone had seen her kids. By 9:30 that night, the Clay County Sheriff's Office got the call. Deputies found the truck within the hour. It sat under an old willow tree at the edge of the Merritt property, right where locals said the farmhouse stood. The truck faced the house. The keys were still in the ignition. The driver's door was hanging slightly open. Inside, the radio was still on, but it only made static. That low, whispering hum filled the dark air around the empty truck. Waist-high grass surrounded it, swaying in the humid wind. Moonlight gave the cracked paint a pale glow. They swept through the surrounding acres looking for any sign of the kids. The property was overgrown and tangled with vines. Old farm equipment lay half buried in the dirt. The sheriff's men searched everywhere but found nothing. No tracks, no signs of fighting, not even a piece of torn clothing. But one thing caught their attention. A single small sneaker sat near the back porch. It was caked in dust but oddly clean around the laces. It looked like someone placed it there instead of dropping it. Inside the farmhouse, the air felt heavy and damp. Boards creaked with every step. Relics of another life were scattered everywhere. A rusted sewing machine sat in one corner. Faded wallpaper curled at the edges. A rocking chair still faced the window like someone had just gotten up from it. Near a shattered window in the kitchen, one deputy noticed something strange. Faint handprints on the inside of the glass. They were too small for an adult. Smudged and desperate-looking, pressed against the dusty surface like someone tried to push through. By dawn, search dogs arrived. They picked up a scent near the back steps, 5 distinct human traces. But the trail vanished less than 50 yards from the house where the weeds turned to open field. It was like the trail had been erased, cut off suddenly at the edge of the property. The Larkin parents waited at the command post through the next morning. Darlene held a blanket that belonged to her youngest son. She rocked slightly in a folding chair as deputies came and went with flashlights and maps. Reporters started showing up. By noon the next day, news trucks lined the road. The story spread through Kentucky like wildfire. Investigators looked at every possibility. Had the siblings run away, been kidnapped, gotten lost in the woods? But the woods were searched for 3 straight days. Helicopters flew over the valley looking for any sign. They found nothing. Locals started whispering other theories. They said the farmhouse was cursed, that people who went inside didn't come back. Some even claimed they saw a light in the upstairs window the night the kids disappeared. a dim yellow glow that flickered once and went dark. The sheriff was a practical man, and he dismissed all that as hysteria. But even he admitted something about the place felt off. On the fourth day, the search expanded to the nearby creek and limestone caves. The sheriff stood on the farmhouse porch and stared at the open doorway. He later told a reporter he couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching them. By the end of that week, hope started fading. There was no sign of the siblings anywhere. No footprints, no vehicle tracks, nothing. The only physical evidence was that single shoe, the handprints on the glass, and the static-filled radio. The farmhouse was sealed off. Then it was reopened days later when volunteers swore they heard noises inside at night. Soft thuds like something was moving around. Deputies went back in but found nothing. They closed the search at midnight on July 20th. For the Larkin family, life stopped that summer. The kitchen table stayed set for 7 people. Their father Frank kept the porch light burning every night for a year. Their mother stopped sleeping in her bedroom. She chose to sit by the window facing the dirt road instead. Every creak of a truck passing by made her stand up hoping it was them. The abandoned farmhouse went back to silence. Its windows dark again. In the official report, it was labeled an unexplained disappearance. But for those who'd been there, it never felt like the search was over. It felt like the beginning of something much stranger. 33 years later, when the property would finally change hands, that silence would be broken. And what waited beneath that old Kentucky farmhouse would prove the truth had been there all along, sealed just beneath their feet. By the 3rd week of the search, Clay County had become the center of a statewide mystery. Patrol cars lined the gravel road leading to the Merritt Farmhouse. The once quiet community now echoed with the sound of engines, police radios, and reporters shouting over each other. Sheriff Wayne Copley was a man who'd spent 23 years handling everything from stolen tractors to backroad accidents. He had never seen anything like this. 5 siblings, gone without a trace. No witnesses, no leads, not even a clear starting point. He stood on the porch of the farmhouse each morning with his hands on his belt, scanning the property like he could force an answer out of the air. Troopers and volunteers spread out through the fields. Search dogs moved in slow, patient circles. Old wells were uncovered. Their rotted lids were pried open to reveal nothing but water and mud. Deputies waded through shallow creeks, checking under driftwood and rock shelves. Others went into the dark mouths of long abandoned coal shafts where the air was thick and foul. They called the siblings' names into silence that swallowed every echo. The media had already given the story a name: the Larkin mystery. Within days, reporters were parked outside the family's farmhouse, filming the mother staring out the kitchen window. National outlets arrived, talking about everything from cults to UFOs. For Sheriff Copley, the cameras only made it worse. He knew the case was slipping away. Detectives started interviewing anyone who might know the property's past. They found drifters camping near the old service road. A few of them claimed they'd seen lights around the farmhouse in the weeks before the kids vanished. One man swore he saw a figure standing in the upstairs window one night. Tall, not moving, lit from behind by a single bulb, locals told darker stories. They said the Merritts, who owned the farmhouse back in the 1950s, had gone mad before disappearing. That there was a cellar built under the house that no one had ever found. Copley didn't believe in curses, but he couldn't ignore the unease that hung over the place. Even his deputies refused to go inside alone. When forensic teams searched through the interior again, they found the siblings' picnic cooler sitting in a corner of the kitchen. The sandwiches were still inside, wrapped in wax paper. Soda cans unopened. A thick layer of dust had already settled on top, like the house itself was trying to erase the evidence of their visit. Nothing else seemed disturbed. No signs of struggle, no valuables missing, no fingerprints that didn't belong to the Larkin kids. Then upstairs, one of the crime scene techs called for the sheriff. In the back bedroom, behind a toppled dresser, 5 names had been scratched into the plaster wall. Rachel, David, Emma, Eli, Matthew. The letters were jagged and uneven, the kind of writing a child would make with something sharp. Each name stopped halfway through like the writer had been interrupted mid-stroke. They photographed it, took samples of the plaster, and even checked for recent etching. But lab results later showed the marks weren't new. The wall had been scratched decades earlier. That detail never made the papers. As summer turned to fall, the search radius widened and then slowly began to collapse. False leads flooded in. Truckers claimed to have seen the siblings hitchhiking on Interstate 75. A woman in Tennessee swore they'd spent the night in her barn. 2 separate men confessed to killing them. Each story contradicted the other. Psychics mailed in hand-drawn maps of the property with red X marks showing supposed graves. Nothing matched. Nothing stuck. Every tip ended in another dead end. By winter, even the national attention faded. Reporters packed up. The search funds ran out. The case file thickened with dead paper. Interview transcripts, weather logs, aerial photos of the farmhouse and surrounding land. The last recorded search took place on December 3, 1986, when deputies dug through a collapsed drainage tunnel half a mile from the Merritt property. They found only mud and a rusted wagon wheel. The farmhouse was condemned 2 months later. County officials boarded the doors, nailed shut the windows, and posted a warning sign across the front steps. Locals stopped going near it. Teenagers who'd once told ghost stories about the place refused to drive down that road. The Larkin family held a memorial service the following spring. No coffins, no remains, just framed photos on the church altar. Their father stood beside the pulpit, silent. Their mother couldn't finish her eulogy. Afterward, they left Clay County for good. They sold what little they owned and moved north to live near relatives in Ohio. The sheriff kept the case file on his desk until 1989. He reopened it twice on anniversaries, hoping that maybe a body or a clue would turn up. It never did. He spent one last evening at the farmhouse that fall, walking through the empty rooms with a flashlight. Dust floated in the beam like mist. The air smelled of earth and mildew. In the back bedroom, he stopped where the 5 names were still faintly visible under the peeling paint. He stood there for a long time before locking the door and stepping back onto the porch. He turned the key, sealed the house again, and slid the file into his coat. That door wouldn't be opened again for more than 3 decades. And when it finally was, the truth waiting behind it would prove that the silence of that farmhouse hadn't been empty at all. It had been holding something. For nearly 3 decades, the Merritt Farmhouse stood in silence. Its windows clouded over with dust. Its roof sagging a little more each year. Seasons passed around it. Winters iced the porch steps. Humid summers brought vines that crawled up the siding and disappeared into the attic. The house seemed to breathe in the quiet, like it had learned to hold its secrets. By the early 1990s, the Larkin family was long gone, living in Ohio, trying to rebuild lives that no longer felt whole. Back in Clay County, the story had already shifted from fact to rumor. People said the farmhouse was cursed. Some said it was haunted. Others said it was simply unlucky land, the kind where things went missing and time stopped paying attention. Teenagers dared each other to go inside. They called it the sleeping house. They'd park at the end of the road, sneak through the fence, and stand under the porch whispering bets about who'd make it to the 2nd floor. Most never did. Those who did claim they heard faint noises. A door closing on its own. The creak of footsteps upstairs. But what they remembered most was the smell. They said it was earthy, like wet soil and old rot, as if something had been buried beneath the floor. No one ever stayed long. By morning, the wind would erase their footprints and the house would settle back into its stillness. Property records show the land changed hands twice during those years. In 1994, it was purchased by a man from Lexington who never visited. He paid the taxes but left it untouched. In 2001, a development company acquired it briefly, intending to clear the area for new housing. But the plans fell through when the county marked the structure as unsafe. Paperwork shows multiple requests for demolition that were never approved. No one could agree who actually owned the land by the mid-2000s. In 2003, a construction crew contracted to install new drainage lines near the property uncovered something strange. While grading the ground for a utility trench, their excavator hit what they first thought was a buried septic tank. When they dug deeper, they realized it was the collapsed entrance to a root cellar. The foreman radioed it in, assuming it was part of the old farmhouse foundation. County inspectors arrived, took a quick look, and marked it unsafe for further digging. Within a week, the entrance was resealed with concrete. The project moved on, but years later, one of the crew members, a man named Paul Reiner, would tell a reporter that he never forgot that day. He said when the excavator bucket first broke the soil, he heard something faint, almost like voices under the ground. Not shouting, not words he could make out, just a low murmur, like whispering through water. He thought it was the sound of the machine echoing in a hollow space, but later, when he was standing alone by the site, the noise came again. Steady and soft, like someone breathing through the dirt. When he told the county supervisor, they laughed it off. Paul quit that job 2 months later. For the next 15 years, the property was forgotten again. The road leading to it grew narrow with overgrowth. The mailbox collapsed. Weeds claimed the porch steps. Hunters passing through said their dogs refused to go near the fence line. A few times, hikers or photographers posted online about the abandoned farmhouse in Clay County. But no one stayed long enough to take more than one picture. Meanwhile, back in Manchester, Sheriff Wayne Copley had retired. His badge was long put away, but one file never left his desk. He kept it in a weathered leather folder labeled Larkin. Inside were maps, photos, plaster samples, and his handwritten notes. Each one marked by dates and question marks. Every July he'd mark another year. Every few months he'd read through the reports again, searching for something he might have missed. In the late 1990s, he started to wonder if the case could have been part of something larger, a human trafficking operation that targeted rural teens. He corresponded with the FBI field office in Louisville, sending summaries and asking for help connecting other disappearances. They replied politely, saying there was no evidence to support the theory. Still, Copley couldn't shake it. He began tracking other unsolved cases across Kentucky and Tennessee, looking for patterns. Missing siblings, abandoned sites, empty cars. There were similarities, but never enough to prove a link. By 2008, he'd started writing his own private notes in the margins. Was this place chosen, or was it something about the house? He underlined the word house 3 times. In his later years, Copley's wife said he would wake up at night, go to his study, and sit in the dark, reading through the same case photos again and again. Sometimes she'd find him staring at the grainy black and white shot of the farmhouse, the boarded windows, the sagging roofline, the overgrown yard. He'd say quietly that he felt like the land itself was hiding something, that whatever happened there wasn't done. By the mid-2010s, the story had faded almost completely from public memory. The older generation still remembered the search, the missing truck, the sheriff's flashlight in the field. But to younger locals, the Larkin case was just another small-town legend. A story you told to scare new kids or to explain the strange stillness that seemed to linger down that road. There were occasional sparks of interest. A podcast episode, a true crime blog post, a mention on an online forum. But nothing lasted. Even when a documentary crew contacted Copley in 2017 asking to film an interview, he declined. He said it wasn't a story you could tell right. It wasn't solved, and it wasn't over. In those years of silence, nature began to reclaim everything. Ivy wrapped around the porch posts. A tree grew through the back fence. Rain pulled in the foundation, seeping into the earth below. The farmhouse, once bright white, turned gray, then brown, blending into the hillside as if it were being absorbed. It became invisible. Not gone, just waiting. When the property was finally listed for sale again in 2018, it drew little attention. Just a few lines in the county database, an address and an old photograph taken from the road. But that single listing, unnoticed by almost everyone, would soon pull the past back to the surface, and when the new owners finally stepped inside, for the first time in more than 30 years, they would find that the house had not been empty at all. It had been keeping something buried, something that had been waiting for someone to listen. By late 2018, the old Merritt Farmhouse had become nothing more than a local relic, a collapsed roofline hidden behind trees and rumor. When Rachel and Thomas Alden signed the purchase papers that October, they saw potential where everyone else saw ghosts. They were in their early 30s, both from Lexington, both trying to start over. He'd left his job in insurance. She was a former school teacher with a small inheritance and a dream of opening a country bed and breakfast. The listing photos showed sunlight spilling through cracked windows, vines curling through the doorway, a fireplace that could be beautiful again. The price was a fraction of what the land was worth. They heard the stories, of course. 5 children who vanished in the 1980s, the locals who swore the house was cursed. But to them it sounded like folklore. Every small town had one. Something about the way people tell old tragedies until they become campfire tales. The first few weeks of renovation went smoothly. They replaced the roof, hauled out broken furniture, and tore down a wall between the kitchen and dining room. By early November, they had power running again and stayed overnight for the first time. That's when the house began to change. It started with the smell. Every morning, the air filled with a faint odor of rot. Earthy and damp, strongest near the kitchen. They checked under the floorboards, the plumbing, even the septic line, but found nothing. Then small things began to disappear. A hammer left by the porch vanished overnight. A box of nails they had unpacked in the pantry was gone the next day. Thomas assumed it was raccoons or neighbors messing around, but Rachel felt watched. She started locking the doors during the day. Their dog, a golden retriever named Scout, refused to go near the basement stairs. Whenever they opened the door, he'd back away, growling softly at the dark. Once he barked so violently that Thomas had to drag him out into the yard. From that point on, the basement door stayed closed. By Thanksgiving, the couple had learned to ignore most of it. Until the morning Rachel noticed a section of the kitchen floor that sounded hollow when she walked over it. She pressed her foot down. A muted echo. Thomas thought it was just a loose plank. But curiosity got the better of them. That afternoon they pried it open. Beneath the board was concrete, uneven and gray, and in the center of it, a small circular outline. A sealed hatch. They stared at it in silence. It didn't match any blueprint, and it wasn't mentioned in the county property records. Thomas thought it might be an old storm shelter sealed after decades of disuse. They left it for a few days, uncertain what to do. But by the end of the week, curiosity outweighed caution. He borrowed a masonry saw and began chipping away at the edge. It took hours. The concrete was thick and old, mixed with stones. When the final layer cracked open, the air that escaped was dense, stale, and cold. They covered their mouths instinctively. Beneath the hatch was a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Limestone walls lined the passage, slick with condensation. Rachel wanted to stop there, but Thomas climbed down halfway with a flashlight. The beam caught old shelves, cobwebs, and what looked like glass jars covered in decades of grime. He came back up quickly, pale and shaking, saying it was just a cellar. But something about the smell, the closeness of the air, unsettled him. They called the county office the next day to report it. Inspectors arrived within 48 hours. The couple expected a citation, maybe a note about structural hazards. Instead, the inspectors decided to enter the space. When they came back up, their faces were ashen. The officials said they'd found the remnants of a hidden root cellar. But it wasn't like any normal cellar. The limestone walls bore faint scratches. The floor showed signs of disturbance. And there, scattered near the back corner, were 5 small personal items. Half buried under dust and soil, a silver necklace with a cracked pendant, a pair of round glasses, a rusted belt buckle, a child's watch frozen at 3:17, and a single shoe. The items were carefully collected and logged as historical artifacts pending verification. But Rachel couldn't sleep that night. She remembered the missing children's story and how the number 5 matched exactly. 2 days later, state police contacted the couple. The items were being sent for forensic testing. They weren't allowed back into the cellar until the investigation was complete. Weeks passed. Winter came early that year. The farmhouse sat quiet again. Police tape across the porch. Thomas and Rachel stayed with family in Lexington, waiting for the results. Then in mid-January 2019, they received a call from a state investigator asking them to come in for a formal statement. The DNA tests were partial but conclusive enough to suggest a connection. 3 of the 5 items contained trace genetic material matching the Larkin family, the same siblings who had disappeared from that property 33 years earlier. Rachel said later that she didn't remember much of what was said after that moment. Only the investigator's tone, calm but heavy, and the sound of a pen scratching notes onto paper. She and Thomas sat in silence on the drive home, realizing that what they'd uncovered wasn't history. It was the evidence of something that had waited beneath their feet the entire time. News spread quickly through Clay County. For the first time in decades, the Larkin name returned to the front page. Former Sheriff Wayne Copley, now in his 80s, was interviewed from his home. He said he wasn't surprised. He'd always known that house was holding on to something. In the weeks that followed, the property became an active crime scene. The hatch was widened, ground-penetrating radar brought in, and for the first time since 1986, the investigation was officially reopened. Rachel and Thomas never went back. They sold the property before spring, telling friends they wanted nothing more to do with it. But years later, when asked about those months, Rachel said she could still remember the sound that came from beneath the floor that day. Not a creak, not a hollow echo. She said it sounded like the house exhaled, and what the investigators would find next would prove she wasn't imagining it. Because what lay beneath that cellar would finally explain what happened to the 5 Larkin siblings all those years ago. Every case on this channel isn't just a story. It's weeks of digging through records, verifying facts, and piecing together real lives that were lost. Each episode takes nearly 15 days of research and long nights chasing the truth. We do this because these stories matter, and someone out there still deserves to be remembered. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth behind these mysteries, please take a second to subscribe, and tell us in the comments which part of today's case hit you the hardest. Your support keeps us going. And if you want to watch more solved cold cases, the links are waiting for you in the description below. Now, let's get back to the case. By February of 2019, the Merritt Farmhouse was no longer just an old property. It was an active crime scene. Within days of the discovery, the Kentucky State Police reopened the Larkin case. And the quiet stretch of rural road that had been forgotten for 3 decades filled again with vehicles, tents, and floodlights. The air was heavy with curiosity and dread. Neighbors who'd grown up hearing the legend now watched as investigators moved carefully through the yard, marking grids, setting up equipment, and drilling into the ground with precision. For the first time since 1986, the farmhouse was breathing again. And this time, it was finally giving something back. A forensic excavation team arrived from Frankfurt, joined by crime scene analysts and an archaeologist specializing in historic structures. They began by examining the root cellar that Rachel and Thomas Alden had uncovered beneath the kitchen. The concrete floor was cracked in several places. Ground-penetrating radar was used to map what lay beneath. The results came back within hours. A hollow void roughly 8 feet deeper than the known cellar. A second chamber. The following morning, excavation began. Layers of compacted earth and limestone were removed by hand, revealing a narrow opening leading into a deeper chamber sealed by collapsed debris. The air was thick, stale, and cold. Once the passage was cleared enough for entry, a forensics officer descended with a respirator and a light. Within minutes, he called up quietly to the surface team. What he had found wasn't just empty space. It was a burial dot at the far end of the lower chamber where 5 distinct forms arranged close together, as though they had been huddled in fear or seeking warmth. The bones were fragile but largely intact. One of the smaller skeletons still wore a shoe that matched the one recovered from the farmhouse porch. In 1986, next to another lay a small wristwatch, stopped at the same time shown on the one found months earlier above ground. When the medical examiner arrived, the scene was photographed and carefully documented. Soil samples were taken. The chamber showed evidence of collapse. suggesting the siblings may have fallen or been trapped when the structure gave way. But as more data came in, the theory of an accident began to falter. The forensic report showed something troubling. Trace amounts of carbon monoxide were detected in the soil and on the bone surfaces, suggesting suffocation, not trauma. And while the chamber had caved in, the way the debris was arranged implied it hadn't fallen naturally. It looked like it had been sealed. Investigators also noticed details that didn't fit the accident narrative. The inside of the cellar door, the one that separated the upper and lower chambers, had a rusted padlock mechanism bolted on the inside. It was an odd design, one that could only be locked by someone within. But on the door frame, the screws were bent inward as if the lock had been forced shut from the outside. On the limestone walls, under a thin layer of dirt and time, were faint claw marks. Fingernail grooves. Hundreds of them. The press wasn't told right away. Officially, the case was still under analysis. But behind the scenes, detectives began digging into old property records and archives, tracing the history of the Merritt family. What they found deepened the mystery. In the Clay County Historical Archives, there was a record from 1952, an inspection report filed by a deputy, regarding unfounded complaints of noise from below the floorboards. It was filed by a man named Harold Merritt, the farmhouse's last recorded owner. His family had vanished just 4 years later, leaving behind a house filled with their belongings and a cryptic note found in a desk drawer. We couldn't stand the sounds anymore. Back at the excavation site, investigators uncovered an old metal toolbox buried near the base of the cellar steps. Inside were tools that hadn't seen light in decades. A rusted lantern, a frayed coil of rope, and a water-damaged notebook wrapped in cloth. The pages were fragile but legible. It was Harold Merritt's handwriting. Most of the notebook was filled with mundane details. Repairs, crop notes, weather patterns. But the final entry, dated August 14, 1952, stopped the investigators cold. It read, "They said they heard them again last night, the children under the floor." It was unclear what that meant, whether it referred to literal voices or the ramblings of a man descending into paranoia. But paired with the evidence of the locked cellar, the claw marks, and the deaths of the Larkins siblings more than 30 years later, the implications were unbearable. Detectives reviewed all available records of the property and surrounding area. There had been reports of missing children in the 1950s. 2. Neighbor kids last seen playing near the Merritt house before disappearing without a trace. The case was never solved. The timing matched the last dated entry in Merritt's journal. The working theory began to take shape. In 1986, when the Larkin siblings explored the house, they might have found the original cellar entrance hidden under rotted flooring. The structure, weakened by age, could have collapsed as they descended, sealing them inside. But the physical evidence complicated things. The deliberate lock, the positioning of the remains, the lack of any visible exit attempts near the upper floor. Someone at some point had sealed that chamber completely. Whether it was Harold Merritt decades earlier or something more recent, investigators couldn't say. DNA tests confirmed that the remains were indeed those of Rachel, David, Emma, Eli, and Matthew Larkin. After 33 years, the missing siblings had been found together, exactly where they were last seen. When former Sheriff Wayne Copley was informed, he reportedly sat in silence for a long time. He later told a reporter that the hardest part wasn't the discovery. It was knowing they had been there the whole time, buried beneath the same dirt they had walked over during the search in 1986. The Merritt Farmhouse was sealed, off permanently. State officials classified the property as structurally unsafe and ordered it controlled demolition once the investigation concluded. But before it could happen, forensic teams spent weeks cataloging every inch of the site. They found no sign of any other human remains, only the traces of the 5 children who'd vanished that summer. For Clay County, it was both a revelation and a nightmare. Closure, yes, but of the kind that left no comfort. Forensic analysts believe the siblings may have survived for several hours, possibly longer, before the air turned toxic. One expert noted that the positioning of their bodies suggested they had been awake and conscious until the end. clinging to one another in the dark. When the official report was released, it listed the cause of death as accidental entrapment and asphyxiation. But investigators quietly admitted the evidence pointed to something more deliberate, something they could never quite prove, the final physical piece of the case. Harold Merritt's notebook was archived by the state police. On the inside cover, faint and almost illegible, someone had written in pencil, "Don't dig." That phrase lingered with everyone who read it, because for more than 30 years, no one had. And when they finally did, what they uncovered wasn't just the truth about the Larkins siblings. It was the proof that the land itself had been keeping secrets long before they ever arrived. And just when investigators thought they had reached the end of the mystery, one final discovery, buried deep in the Merritt family history, would reveal that this wasn't the first time the farmhouse had taken lives. By May of 2019, the case that had haunted Clay County for more than 3 decades finally had a conclusion. DNA confirmed what everyone already suspected. The remains found beneath the Merritt Farmhouse belonged to the 5 missing Larkin siblings. Their identities were verified through mitochondrial samples taken from surviving relatives for the first time since that summer in 1986. There were no more theories, no more search parties, no more false hope. Only names, dates, and silence. The announcement came quietly. There were no press conferences, no televised statements. Just a short release from the Kentucky State Police declaring the case officially closed. The tone was subdued. Closure, they said, after 33 years of speculation. For the Larkins' remaining family, it was bittersweet. They finally had answers, but the truth came with the weight of everything that had been lost in the waiting. Locals, who had grown up hearing the legend, reacted with disbelief. Some refused to accept the findings, insisting there had to be more to it, that something darker was still buried beneath the explanations. Others were just relieved it was over. The farmhouse was condemned, fenced off, and scheduled for demolition later that summer. But before that happened, investigators began one last sweep of the property's history, determined to understand what had really gone wrong. In the process, a detail from the past surfaced, something long overlooked. In the county archive, tucked away in a box labeled Merritt Herald Correspondence, they found a single police report from 1953. It described a pair of missing children who vanished near the same property. The document was short, just 3 paragraphs. But it mentioned that deputies searched the Merritt farm after reports of strange noises and children crying under the floorboards. The search turned up nothing, and the incident was closed without resolution. Those 2 children were never found. When detectives cross-referenced the old report with census data, they discovered that Harold Merritt, the man who owned the farmhouse at the time, had a long history of psychiatric issues. Medical records from the state hospital in Lexington showed that he'd been treated for paranoia and delusional episodes. He believed a catastrophic storm was coming, one that would wipe the land clean, according to his notes. He'd spent years building hidden chambers beneath the farmhouse, designed to protect what he called the innocent ones. The deeper investigators looked, the more disturbing the pattern became. Handwritten diagrams recovered from Merritt's notebook showed multiple underground spaces, small sealed rooms, each with its own entry mechanism. County land surveys confirmed that at least 2 of those chambers were never excavated. One had collapsed decades earlier. Another might have been filled in intentionally. The picture that emerged was grim. Harold Merritt's paranoia had driven him to madness. Believing he was saving children from an imagined disaster, he built a network of underground shelters, and in at least one instance trapped living people inside. Records indicate that he died by suicide in 1956, found in the barn behind the house, leaving no confession. Only a short note that read, "They're safe now." Forensic engineers later concluded that when the Larkin siblings entered the farmhouse in 1986, they likely stepped onto a weakened section of flooring above one of those chambers. The wood collapsed, dropping them into the same space Merritt had built 30 years earlier. The trapdoor mechanism, a counterweight system originally designed to seal the shelter, had rusted but was still functional. When the siblings fell through, the hatch closed automatically, locking them in. The structure's old limestone walls and the heavy earth above prevented any sound from escaping. The siblings would have had air for a time, but not for long. Tests on the chamber's interior confirmed lethal levels of carbon monoxide, produced by the decomposing soil and trapped organic matter. The evidence suggested they remained alive for several hours before succumbing. It was an accident. One built on the foundation of someone else's insanity decades before. When the final report was published, Sheriff Wayne Copley, now 84, requested a copy. He read it alone in his study, the same way he had read the missing persons files for years. He didn't say much afterward, only that he wished he'd been wrong. That the truth would somehow have been kinder. In June, before demolition began, Copley drove out to the Merritt property one last time. The fields were overgrown, but the air felt clearer than he remembered. An excavator stood waiting by the driveway, its metal arm poised over the collapsed remains of the house. He stayed back behind the safety line as workers began tearing through what was left of the structure. As the foundation cracked open, light spilled into the exposed cellar for the first time in 33 years. Dust rose in soft spirals. The space that had once been sealed tight finally breathed. Standing there, the old sheriff thought about all the nights he'd stood on that same porch with a flashlight, convinced the answers were just beyond reach. They had been, but not in the way anyone imagined. There was no monster, no curse, no legend to chase, only human fear, human error, and the ruin it leaves behind. When the demolition was complete, the ground was leveled and reseeded with grass. By fall, wild flowers began to grow over the site. The land looked peaceful again, though anyone who knew the story understood that peace wasn't the same as forgiveness. In the end, the truth wasn't supernatural. It didn't need to be. The real horror was simpler. A man's madness buried beneath generations of silence. A family's loss suspended in time. And a town that tried to forget until the earth itself forced them to remember. As the years passed, people stopped driving out to see the site. The road grew quiet again, and the fields settled back into the rhythm of the hills. But on certain evenings, when the wind moved just right through the grass, locals swore you could still hear something faint. Not cries or whispers, just a sound like the shifting of old soil, as if the land itself was remembering what it had kept hidden for so long.